Welcome, everyone, to Higher Journeys. I am your host, Alexis Brooks. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I kind of had a bit of an epiphany as I was preparing for our next guest, Ms. Barbara Lamb, well known, world renowned ET contact researcher and regression therapist. I want to speak with Barbara about a phenomenon that I am going to call switched off. This very, very anomalous aspect of the contact phenomenon, in which a being or a set of beings have the ability to switch off certain individuals that may be in close proximity to an individual that they'd like to take. How are they doing this? Why are they doing this? And what does this tell us about the true nature of time and space as we understand it? So, without further ado, let's get into this conversation. Switched off with Barbara Lamb. Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. What a pleasure and an honor to have on once again. I say once again, it's Barbara Lamb, probably been a couple of years since you've graced our presence, and I'm
Yeah,
delighted that you're here today. I'm delighted, journeyers, that Barbara is joining us. We've talked about many things over the years, but there's something that kind of came to me, Barbara, just not that long ago, maybe within the hour, as I prepared with copious notes for a conversation. I had an epiphany. Throw the notes away. I want to focus on this. Now, Barbara, you have regressed upwards of 5,000 or more individuals since what, 1991, I believe? You've seen a lot of things. You've heard a lot of stories
yeah.
through regression. But there's a phenomenon. I don't know that there's a name, journeyers, for this. I'm calling it the switched off phenomenon. This is a
Mhm.
phenomenon in which beings or a being or beings will come into a room, perhaps, maybe if it's an office setting, and wanting to take an individual, but freezing, literally shutting down everyone else in the individual's proximity, literally freezing time, Barbara. This is quite fascinating to me. And I figured we would spend our time really digging into this idea, what this is, how they're doing it, and what you've learned throughout all of these regressions in that regard. So, again, welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's very, very typical that when the extraterrestrials come to a person, that they make it so that the person is not aware. Sometimes from the very beginning, sometimes the person is switched off. In other words, not aware of even anything happening in their room, or anybody being there, or a light coming in the room, or anything. In other words, they're switched off right from the very beginning of the experience. And sometimes when they come, they switch off the other person who might be in the room.
Mhm.
In other words, somebody might be sleeping in the bed with somebody, and that person is completely not aware of the experience at all. And yet, the person who's going to be taken might be aware for, several moments, usually not much more than that. And then that person is switched off too, and they're taken and have a whole experience with lots of detail in it, and yet the person is not consciously aware of that. So that's what the beings do, because I think that they know that we get very, very frightened
Mm.
by beings coming into the room. Um, some people are not frightened, but most people are, and they get very reactive. And the beings know that when we are taken, we do get very reactive, and often people will sort of flail out and kick and
Mm.
punch and everything, because they don't really want to be taken. Even if they're having good experiences with the beings. That just seems to be a typical reaction of people. So it happens individually like that when a person is in the room with somebody else, or even people in the house at nearby. They are switched off out of
Hmm.
conscious awareness too. But it can also happen in larger settings. In other words, a person could be at a party. I know of a situation like this where a young woman, college student, was in a party in somebody's home, and the beings landed across the street from that home and came uh, into the house through the front door, even though the front door was closed in
Hmm.
that case, and came into the room where the party was and switched off everybody in the party. So that means that one person was picking up a beer and was sort of stopped right there as if frozen in place. Another
Hmm.
person was smoking a cigarette, and that person stopped. Another person was turning on some music and was stopped right there, and other people doing various things. And everybody in the room, including the person who was taken for that experience, everybody was just paused, just
Wow.
like putting on the pause button,
Right.
and and remained that way right through the whole experience. So then the person was switched off and was taken out again through the closed door and had the experience. And oh, maybe an hour or so, maybe 2 hours, was brought back again through the closed door and sat down in the room where she had been taken from. And then the beings left, and everybody came back into consciousness. And one person in the room noticed that, oh, it was time to go home. Where did the time go? How did it fly that fast?
Wow.
That he must have been having a great time because the time was going by so quickly. Anyway, that was a case of a whole group being switched off, as well as the person who was taken for that encounter. And I know of another situation too, where um, the person who was taken was working in a very large um, room. It was an insurance company in the city, and so they were all working away busily as usual. And then um, the elevator opened, and three beings came in, switched everybody off, and took the woman for the whole experience. And that lasted for, oh, maybe about an hour and a half, or even two in that case. And then they brought her back and put her back in her cubicle in the office where she had been working. And then the beings left, and everybody came back into conscious awareness. And she looked at her watch and she thought, wow, I must have dozed off or something because it's a couple of hours later.
Wow.
And then she began to hear the person in the cubicle next to her saying, wow, the time really flew by today. It's just about time to go home. And other people were getting up and leaving and going by her cubicle and saying, wow, I've never had an afternoon go by so
It's
quickly
amazing.
as this. So they were all switched off and then switched back on again, and life went on.
Right.
So it's amazing that the beings have a way of doing that
Absolutely. Yeah.
without even touching the person. They just do it from, um, a, a distance. It could be several feet, or it could be, 20 or 30, 40 feet away. They switch them all off. And we don't know how they do that.
No. Well,
That's
this is
one
another kind of physics, obviously, that they're employing. But if I
of
may just ask a question, because there's so much detail there and so many questions to be asked. I think the first question I'll ask is, how common has this been in all the regressions you've done where some semblance of this has come out? I mean, I have heard of cases of maybe an individual with their husband or wife in the bed, and
right,
the partner will be can't be aroused, can't be woken up. So
that's
I would
right,
that you would call that a form of switching off. But I mean, you're really talking about something
definitely.
where people are being frozen in time and space, literally, and you have
Yeah.
to wonder what's the radius of, were people across the street switched off? Was everybody switched off for that period of time? What other pieces of information or clues have you been able to gather from these sorts
Well,
of things?
that's a good, question. I do know, with one person who came to me that, she was on the beach, with a group of people right there by her, and then, of course, a whole beach full of people, and, the switching off happened, and she was taken right there from her blanket on the beach, and, apparently everybody else was switched off too, because when she was brought back, nobody came up to her and said, "We saw something unusual.
Right.
We saw a ship, or we saw, beings." So apparently they were switched off too. So that implies that the switching off can happen over a really large territory.
Mhm. This this sort of anomaly, and I say anomaly, this is that's an understatement,
Yes.
really causes one to question, Barbara, the nature of time and space.
Oh,
We've
it
heard
does.
talk about this before, that we could be living in perhaps some form of simulation, a construct that has the ability to be switched literally on and off or shifted. We've heard of parallel timelines. All of these things come into play when we're talking about a phenomenon like this, that there is some intelligence that has the ability, forgive the term using switch so much, to literally switch reality on and off at a whim. What are
Right.
the implications of this?
Well, it's just a remarkable thing. Um, I don't think people have that ability. I've never heard of people doing such a thing. But you see, these beings have so many remarkable abilities. It's very commonly known by people who pay attention to this sort of thing that they come right through a wall,
Yes.
and they come they take the person right through the wall and float them up through space and into the UFO, and the person is not harmed in that process at all. In fact, I had that happen once to me, uh, taken right through the wall. And another time, uh, well, that time, the first time, I was taken up through where two walls meet the ceiling, that kind
Mhm,
of a corner
mhm.
of the room. And when I was regressed to get the details of that experience, what I felt going through the wall was nothing. I felt
You
absolutely
felt
nothing.
nothing, no sensation whatsoever.
didn't feel the wall, the corner, or anything. So that means I was really deeply switched off to not feel that. And how they do that, we have no idea. I think it is kind of a sense of disassembling
Yes.
all the molecules of
Yes.
our body. And I had an experience like that in Egypt, that feeling of all the particles of my body separating, like all floating around, but separating. And that experience was not an abduction experience. That was an experience of being with a group of people in the basement of the second of the three great pyramids. And where I was with a group of people, we were all in a separate cubicle, and we were all chanting the Om chanting. And the chanting went on for quite a while. And um, and that got us into an altered state of consciousness. And in that altered state of consciousness, still doing the channeling, I felt all the particles of my body just separating
Interesting.
as if floating independently. And yet I was still able to do the chanting. And it was a wonderful experience, a remarkable experience. I
Yeah.
had never experienced anything like that before or since, and I had never even heard of anything like that before, but it was happening. I think it had a lot to do with the energy of that pyramid
Sure.
and also the doing the Om chant for sure, because that can get you into a really deep state
Absolutely.
of consciousness, very
The
different than our everyday awareness.
Yeah.
So that was a magnificent experience of, and I was thinking of it in terms of dissembling.
Mhm.
My body was dissembling. And that's why it seemed like all the particles were separated from each
Right.
other.
Two questions for you. Were the other people that were with you in the pyramid at the time, did they have a similar experience, or were you the only one? You
No,
Oh, interesting. Okay, so my second question is, do you recall if this occurred after you were taken through the wall where you were perhaps disassembled, or was it before, if you recall? If you're enjoying this episode, along with all of the subjects that we cover here on Higher Journeys, then I invite you to join our members only community on Patreon, where we go even deeper into the conversations with the guests that you know and love. Not only does your membership ensure that we can keep this work going and growing, but you'll also get immediate access to our exclusive after shows. Get up close and personal with the guests of the show, along with many other member perks. So click on the link below to join now, or visit higherjourneys.com where you'll find the Patreon link. We'll see you on the journey. Thanks.
I think I was dissembled as I was going through the wall.
Right. But did that experience where you went through the wall, did that happen before the chanting and feeling your molecules? That event, did that happen before or after, if you recall? In other words,
And during the chanting in the pyramid, that happened during that experience.
no, I understand, but
Yeah,
let's see if I can phrase it a little bit differently. You had an encounter at one point in which you were taken through a wall, is that correct?
right.
Okay, that was at a certain time. The incident in the pyramid, do you recall if that happened after the incident of your being taken through the wall?
Oh, no, the experience in Egypt in the pyramid happened years before.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, where I was going with that, Barbara, is it could there be some connection in you were the only one that had that sensation. But then again,
Yeah.
you have also been taken through a wall. There are probably some other encounters maybe that you're not conscious of, in which this process of disassembling atoms and molecules, being able to go through quote unquote solid objects, you're probably more familiar with than you consciously realize.
Well, I do
So
know of another experience that I had walking through the hallway in my house. And in that case, I was taken up. It was like swooshed way up through the ceiling and through the second floor and through the roof and out into the air and then up in the air. And all of this came through a regression as well. I knew that something strange was happening
mhm,
because as I walked through that hallway, I suddenly felt like I couldn't move any further through the hallway. In other words, I could move my body, but I couldn't move through something. It seemed like an invisible shield or something, an invisible wall that I couldn't walk through. And then I was just, as I say, swooshed upwards through the ceiling, through the second floor, through the roof, and out into the air, and continued to be drawn upwards. And I didn't see anyone pulling me up like that. It was just sort of like an invisible whew,
like a
swoosh
magnet. Yeah,
right up. Very unusual experience, and then into a craft.
into a craft. This
Yes.
is uh, all of these things. This is fantastic information, Barbara. Thank you so much. And like I said, I really felt like we needed to sort of hone in on some of the more mind-boggling aspects to this phenomenon. The whole thing is mind-boggling because there's still so many questions. But I think one of the reasons why I'm so intrigued by this kind of conversation is because people are experiencing things that they don't necessarily frame within the ET contact phenomenon. But particularly lately, I'm hearing of more and more people talking about anomalies of time, seeing repeating numbers. You know that we've done quite a few shows. I'm talking to the audience on that phenomenon and what may be behind that. We're trying to understand how reality works and our place in it,
Mhm.
and perhaps one of the goals of some of the beings is to show us what is possible or what we're really living in, not what we think, not what we think at all.
Oh,
Perhaps
there's
we do have the ability to do these things because we're noticing more of them. What do you think?
well, I don't think anybody that I've ever heard of has the ability to switch people off
No?
or take them. No, no. I mean, maybe somebody does, but I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Um, I've I've never heard of people doing any of the things that the beings do. Like how do they come here? They must go through the wall too. I
Mhm.
mean, people will often would be sleeping at night and they will suddenly see somebody there
Yes.
and all the doors of the house are locked, and maybe the window is even closed in the room, but suddenly they're there.
That's right.
So, so they not only take us through the wall, but they apparently go through the wall themselves. And a very interesting thing is that many people, especially children, uh, say that a being has come out of the closet
Mhm. That's
in
right.
their room.
Mhm.
Now, why the closet, I don't know. Maybe somehow, mysteriously, a closet is some kind of portal
Right.
that
Right.
they come through. And but usually, when a person is an adult and the beings come through, as far as I know, they don't come through the closet, but nevertheless they're in the room. And it's like many people feel that a light comes into the
Mhm.
room. They may be sleeping at night and suddenly they're awake and they're noticing that a very bright light is coming into the room. And then they notice that there are beings in the room, that they have come in somehow also. And on other occasions, sometimes people will see little lights flying around the room. That's their first awareness.
Mhm.
And they might be a whole bunch of lights flying all around the room. Or it might be one orb, a lighted orb
Mhm.
flying around the room. And then that seems to morph into the beings as if the beings have come out of that orb of light. Of
Right.
course, the orb gets bigger mysteriously, and then the beings can come out of it and be in the room.
Mhm. Mhm.
Again, that's something that, as far as I know, no people know how to do that sort of thing.
Right. It's not being initiated or originated from humans. However, as you say that, Barbara, it makes me think when individuals are taken by the beings and levitated or brought through, not only I've heard of not only through walls but through ceilings, through windows,
Oh, yes.
you wonder if perhaps they're acclimating us to something that they know we do have the ability to do. It doesn't mean that we're doing it readily. It's just like we're not readily telepathically communicating with each other. And yet, how many times have we heard that the communication that exists between humans and the non-humans are telepathic, which means we have the capacity to do that as well. So do you
Yes,
think there's a teaching component to all of this? Not just showing us what they can do, but what we may be able to do?
they may be. And I think the example of telepathy is a really good one because when the people are on the craft, uh, the beings can talk to them. I
Mhm,
mean, in fact, they can teach them. They can keep it up for a long time on the craft. A long time meaning, you know, half an hour, hour,
mhm, mhm,
maybe more in some cases, because a lot of people are taught on the when they're on the craft. They're taught and taught psychic skills
mhm.
and taught a whole lot of things
Yeah.
about how to do many different processes that we tend to not do here on Earth. And that talking goes on telepathically.
Mhm, mhm,
Also, I think it's very interesting, and this has happened in many of the regressions, that a person will be lying on a table and maybe some examinations are going on, or maybe maybe even some healing is going on. And the beings will talk to them telepathically, and the person understands what they're saying.
mhm.
And,
Yes.
and not only that, but sometimes a person will be examined or poked or probed or whatever,
Mhm,
and or maybe even being healed with light, and the person will wonder, what are they doing? And I will say, would you like to know what they're doing? And the person will say yes. And I will say, well, you can ask the beings what they're doing. You can ask out loud, or you can ask in your mind,
Mhm.
and they will understand you. And so they go ahead and do that, and they get an answer telepathically from the beings, because the beings don't speak out loud. And then they repeat to me what the beings have said. So yes, you're right that
Mm.
we do actually have the ability to do telepathy, but
Yes.
we don't go around doing that.
Not yet.
Most people don't know that they have that ability.
Yeah. And yet it seems that these things, Barbara, somehow seep through, with people's experiences. I'm hearing from so many people that are starting to talk about these things that you know,
Yeah,
we frame them as synchronicities when they're thinking of an individual and the individual calls, but you wonder what process is actually going on there. And we're talking about
right,
energy and frequency and vibration as Nikola Tesla so famously talked about. If you want to know the mysteries of the universe or the secrets of the universe,
right.
we're employing these things, perhaps not even realizing that we are. And so, as we try to bring meaning to why we're interacting with these beings, as you well know, for so many years, this could be one of the whys that they're teaching us, you know, not
Yes.
just showing us what they can do, but showing us what we can eventually do.
Oh, they do a lot of teaching
Mm,
with some people in some instances. Uh, I mean, people have reported um, learning not only telepathy, but learning a whole variety of psychic skills.
mhm, mhm,
And they are taught, in some cases, how to heal people back here on
mhm,
Earth,
mhm,
heal
mhm,
people or heal animals or heal birds. I have two or three cases where a person has been able to pick up an injured bird lying on the ground and hold that bird in hands and actually healing the bird,
yeah.
and the bird flies away.
Wow, that's
There are
amazing.
three cases of that
Huh,
have come to me. So that's wonderful.
yeah.
Also, um, something that I think is very interesting is that sometimes a child will be taken and put into a room on the spaceship and sat on the floor, and there will be other children sitting on the floor too. Now, some of those are Earth children that have been taken on the same occasion, and some of them will be uh, hybrid children, so they look a little different, and some of them will be extraterrestrial little children, all sitting in a circle on the floor, and there will be one or two adults standing nearby as if orchestrating
Mm,
or teaching them the skills. And the skills are that they can move an object across from one side of the circle to the other side simply with their minds
mhm,
without
mhm,
touching that object at all. So they will start with something very, very light to practice with, like
mhm,
a small feather, like a bird feather, just like a very small, light one. And then they learn to move that across the circle, one child after the other, with his or her mind. And then they will practice on moving something a little bit heavier, like maybe a small piece of paper. And then when they have succeeded in doing that, each one of them then they'll go on to a larger piece of paper, and so on, with heavier and heavier objects. And the heaviest one that I have heard of from a person who did that as a child, the heaviest one was a ball about the size of a basketball.
Really? Uh-huh.
Yes. So that has some weight to it.
And literally,
Yeah. So
literally
they do
a
that.
basket.
And then those
Yeah.
children are coached in other skills too. But that one, that teleportation one, is the one that I've heard about
Yeah,
the
and
most.
telekinesis as well. Telekinesis, yeah. That's
Yeah.
we actually just had I'm sure you know Caroline Corey, who's done some amazing work
Yes.
in this field broadly, and she has actually taught some classes on telekinesis. We just spoke about that with Caroline last week. So, well,
Oh,
listen, speaking of teaching, this is something that I believe every mom and dad and child should know about. And this is Barbara's latest book. It's called Kids Adventures with E.T. Friends in Space. And it is long stories of friendship and learning between human kids and extraterrestrials. Look at that.
right.
And
Yeah.
it is just glorious. When did this come out, Barbara?
2015. Oh,
Oh,
no, I'm sorry. No, it came out in 2020.
2020. Okay, I was going to say I thought that was because you've done something since then. Well, I know one of the books that Barbara wrote, I had the pleasure of narrating. That is Meet the
Yes.
Hybrids.
Yes.
Barbara co-wrote that with Miguel Mendonça. So that's still doing quite well. Meet the Hybrids. That was a really fun book to record for both of you. But this
Oh,
is your latest effort. This is your
yeah.
latest effort. And we're
Yeah.
actually going to be going next door to talk about it at the Patreon after show. What really want to dig in, Barbara, to why this is an important book. It's a children's book, and we think light, and it doesn't really have a lot of heaviness to it. Well, as I'm talking to many parents and even some children who are talking about their own experiences, and we can't necessarily say that all of them are of extraterrestrial, of that realm. Many may be. And there are a lot of parents that are perplexed as to what to do. Maybe they're not listening. And this is the kind of book, Barbara, that I think can help. So I want to take this next door. We're going to talk, we're going to dig into this book. She's going to show us some pictures. Maybe she'll hold up the book for us during the after show.
Okay.
And let's talk about some ways that you can get this book out to more people, because I think it's really important. So, Barbara, stay tuned. We're going to sign off. This is a short segment today. We're going to sign off on the main show. Meet us next door so we can talk about this great book. If you have a child that is exhibiting qualities or maybe telling you stories about their quote imaginary friends, this is a conversation you're going to want to hear, journeyers, because it may be a little bit deeper than you think. So join us next door. All right, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to watch what's next, plus more to explore. And don't forget to subscribe to Higher Journeys.